Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world, back from vacation, and it's great to see our country barely hanging by a thread. It's good to be back, though. I'm glad you're here. We've said a bunch lately, last couple of years really, that your kids or grandkids will not know the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. They won't know. First of all, Reverend, right? So that's the first sign that he's not welcome in today's polite society, but he believed in judging people by the content of their character. There's no room for that. There's no room for that racist Martin Luther King Jr. in today's Black Lives Matter movement, in today's critical race theory movement. He will be erased from our history. His statues will be torn down, just like Gandhi's statues are being torn down. You thought it was going to stop at Confederate generals? It's not going to stop at anyone. We have a statue downtown San Diego of Tony Gwynn. I'm sure we're going to tear that one down sometime soon. But I didn't think we'd ever have the day when your kids or grandkids would not know who George Washington is. But you've seen the statues of George Washington torn down last week. One of them had 1619 spray painted on the side. And the founder of the 1619 Project said that she was proud of that. There it is right there, 1619. So one day you're going to be with your grandkids. I'm certain this is true. You'll be with your grandkids and you'll mention George Washington in passing somehow. And your grandkid's going to say, who's George Washington? You're going to say, wait, what? What are you talking about? The father of our country? Like, oh, no, Gramps, I do remember that. I do. That's the racist, slave-owning bigot guy. Yeah. No, I remember him. If you are, at that moment, not armed with the tools to combat that lesson that your kids and grandkids will be learned, then the legacy of George Washington and every great person who has ever come before us will be gone forever. I'm going to stop on that point right now because this week we're going to do our special on tearing down statues and forgetting our history in general. So I want to stop there. And we're going to talk also about why purges like this have happened many times in history. French Revolution, Cultural Revolution in China. Same things happen. We're not immune to these things that have happened in all of world history. It's happening right now in real time, right in front of us. But one quick thing on the George Washington statue. This is Trump during the whole Charlottesville debacle back in 2017. Remember the Robert E. Lee statue was the main thing there. Here's Trump back then.
Excuse me, I saw the same pictures as you did. You had people in that group that were there to protest the taking down of, to them, a very, very important statue and the renaming of a park from Robert E. Lee to another name.
Washington and Robert E. Lee are not the same.
No, George Washington was a slave owner. Was George Washington a slave owner? So will George Washington now lose his status? Are we going to take down, excuse me, are we going to take down statues to George Washington? How about Thomas Jefferson? What do you think of Thomas Jefferson? You like him? Okay, good. Are we going to take down the statue? Because he was a major slave owner. Now we're going to take down his statue. So you know what? It's fine. You're changing history, you're changing culture, and you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay? And the press has treated them absolutely unfairly.
So Trump asked the rhetorical question, should George Washington and Thomas Jefferson statues be taken down? And a good number of people in America said, yes, they should. And now they are. That was only 3 years ago, right? And I don't see anyone trying to, or at least I haven't until maybe now, people trying to stop it. And I get it, because if you do try and stop people from tearing down these statues, first of all, if you go and surround the statue or something, it's going to cause some violence, right? So you have the instigators, you're trying to stop them, they beat you up, and you're going to be in trouble, right? You're going to be called the instigator because you were defending property, right? So you know the media is never going to take your side in this argument here. So you will be framed as the bad guy if you or anyone were to try and stop these vandals. So no people are stopping it, and then you hope the police and the government will protect his property. Trump has fortunately cracked down on stopping people from destroying federal property, federal statues at least, so we put a stop to that, ideally. So that's why no one's doing anything, and it's not at least on a local level, it's never going to stop. It's never going to stop. So that's the tearing down of statues, like forcefully at night. But then it was last week or so, the New York City City Council voted to remove a statue of Thomas Jefferson from the city council chambers. So you have two groups of people tearing down statues. You have those in masks in the cover of darkness, and you have those in government in broad daylight tearing down statues. And if you say anything about it, you're a racist. Thomas Jefferson, tearing down statues of Thomas Jefferson, the man who wrote "All men are created equal," which was a revolutionary idea unheard of in all of human history. And when he was president, he signed the law that banned the importation of slaves on the very first day that it was constitutionally allowed, January 1st, 1808. He signed it almost a year early. I think he signed it in March of the year prior. And it said on the very first day that we are constitutionally allowed to ban the importation of slaves, we are going to do it. And that's what he did, but we're going to tear his statue down too. The man who wrote the Declaration of Independence, which has been the guiding light and source of hope for all oppressed people in the entire world, we're going to tear his statue down by a vote of New York City politicians. It won't stop. It'll never stop. People have lost their minds. I just want to reiterate this story real quick. I know this may be kind of old. I'm kind of a week late. Took a week off. Oakland, have you heard this one? Good night. This big tree, some park in Oakland. And someone found a noose. Okay, listen. If you hear a story about a noose, I thought we were past this already because for years there's been all these fake news stories. It didn't happen. No one's hanging nooses around, okay? Anytime you hear a noose story, 99% chance it's fake, all right? So I heard this one the other day about the noose hanging from the tree in Oakland. This is the mayor of Oakland here. She says we got to start with the presumption that it's a hate crime. Here's what she said.
That is why I've directed our staff to remove any such symbol of hatred, regardless of the intention of what put it there. What a privilege for those of us that don't feel complete fear and terror when we see a rope in the tree. That is a privilege that so many of our African American residents do not enjoy. We have to see this moment for what it is, a reckoning. And in Oakland, we cannot further terrorize or traumatize our Black residents. And yes, the incidents of the last few weeks, but frankly of the last few centuries, is the backdrop upon which we have to make these decisions today. Enough is enough. And again, the intentions do not matter because the harm is real.
That's such critical race theory garbage. Intent doesn't matter because the harm, it hurts someone's feelings, therefore it's real no matter what. Intent doesn't matter at all. Total garbage. So the news from a tree, right? What'd she say? She said, fear and terror. Complete fear and terror when you see a rope, a noose hanging from a tree. We're terrorizing and traumatizing our Black residents. Turns out, shockingly, it wasn't a noose. It was a rope from some exercise bands that a Black guy installed for exercise, and kids would play with the ropes from the tree or whatever, and they left one up by accident. Some Black guy put it up. It's like a Black guy from Africa, and he came out and he's like, "This is crazy. It's been here for weeks. Thousands of people have walked by it, and one neurotic nutcase saw it, and so, it's a noose, I'm traumatized." And now the mayor comes out and says, "Oh, we're so sorry, all of our Black residents, centuries of oppression of Black people." And it was an exercise rope. Everyone's lost their minds. But here's the key: intent does not matter. It's all just made up. Your feelings of victimization. As long as you can make it up and feel victimized, that's all that matters. Same with Bubba Watson and then the NASCAR noose. So again, same thing. I saw that story over break, and I was like, "Oh, that didn't happen. No way did that happen." And it didn't happen. Right? Apparently there's some rope that's been there for months or whatever, right? But he wrote back, he wrote this long, victimized, blah, blah, blah. And then when it came out that it was just a rope hanging from the ceiling, he wrote, "Still standing proud, still smiling." From what? From what? There was no noose. What are you standing proud about or from? Why? What? Nothing happened. But this is critical race theory. You are racist all the time, no matter what. and everyone else is a victim all the time. Literally, no matter what. We're gonna talk, I gotta go here because we got a lot to do. Let me go fast. So we're gonna talk more about this week. So there's something called diversity, inclusion, and equity. DIE is the acronym. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is, if you take all of critical race theory and you boil it down into the thing that's going to go into your office, certainly, that's absolutely what happened if it hasn't already. It's gonna be diversity, inclusion, and equity. All of them mean the exact opposite of what you think they mean. Okay? So diversity does not mean having lots of different types of people and different people from different backgrounds and opinions. It does not mean that. It means having different people from different oppressed victim groups, but all of them have to have the exact same worldview, the exact same critical race theory perspective of life. Okay, so that's diversity. It's the opposite of diversity. Inclusion means welcoming. You and I, that's how we usually use it, right? If inclusive, it means you're welcoming, right? But in woke speak, it means your workplace is creating an environment that doesn't create any feelings of discomfort to any minority person ever. All right, this is the safe space that we heard about in colleges years ago, now into the real world, right? So everything's got to be inclusive. You can't make anyone feel uncomfortable. Anything you do that makes anyone feel uncomfortable, any mere presence of your person can make someone, you as a straight white male or whatever, your existence in a work environment can make this a not inclusive space for me. Therefore, you have to go. This is why it was reported that the stepmother of one of the police officers in Atlanta was fired from she was like HR of some financial company or something, because her presence made other people uncomfortable, okay? So that's what inclusion really means. You're gonna hear words like causes harm, right? Something causes harm, something causes trauma, makes me relive trauma. That's what that person who complained about the noose up in the tree, that was their argument, is that it makes me relive trauma. And you're thinking, like, what are you talking about? You're in your 20s. Like, you've never seen anyone lynched? Like, what do you mean? Like, why does a noose give you trauma? You're like 25 years old. What are you talking about? It's because she, the black person who saw it, is a part of a racial group. She's not an individual, she's a member of a group, and people in her group have a lived experience of lynching, which, by the way, lynching was around in the South long before it was used to kill black people. But anyway, so therefore, she's a victim still today. So the noose causes her harm and trauma because of her lived experience, not her personal experience. That's very different. Her lived experience as a member of the black person group, right? So your presence can make something a not inclusive space. All right, so inclusion is a way to silence you or even remove you. And it's all disagreement, not even about race. Any disagreement can be framed as racial. So if you're in a meeting and some black person comes up with an idea and then a white person doesn't like the idea, that's upsetting. That's a power imbalance. It's a power imbalance that's reinstituting structural legacies of slavery. I mean, this is the nonsense that is going to be, if not already, in your workplace. All right? You're gonna hear words like, I'm tired. I'm so tired. People will say, it's exhausting. Right? And if you don't bow down to the critical race people, the social justice warriors who are saying this stuff, then you're going to be sued. and you're racist and you will be sued. Anyway, that's inclusion, the opposite of what we think it means. And then equity. Equity, we think it means equality of opportunity, but to the mob, it means equity of outcome. So any disparate outcome is racist at its core, right? So the example I always use is the turnstiles at the subway in San Francisco. You have to pay the subway fare. It's illegal to jump the turnstiles, but more black people jumped the turnstiles than white people. Therefore, the law that says you can't jump the turnstiles is racist. So now in San Francisco, you could jump the turnstiles. So they got rid of the law because the law was racist because it had disparate impact on black people over white people, right? If you hear the words diversity, inclusion, and equity from a company-wide email or your HR department or whatever, run. Run as fast as you can. In short, diversity means uniformity, inclusion means exclusion, and equity means discrimination. Welcome to 1984. I gotta go. I don't know what we're gonna do about all this. I really don't. The only thing I can think of is we need to build 2 statues to every statue that's torn down. Literally, we need to build more statues to George Washington and others, and figuratively. We build 2 statues for every one that they tear down, literally and figuratively. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, we got Larry Elder coming up in just a few minutes here, so I want to do this segment quick and leave more time for him. And of course, Professor Vincent Racaniello will give us the latest with COVID in a minute too. I read some blog posts by a professor. He was writing as if Homer were addressing us today. Right? His name is Professor Louis Marcos. He wrote this as if he were Homer writing. Does that make sense? But it's based off of Homer's writings, and they're fun to read. So here's one. He's talking to, this is Homer talking to sons. And Homer's saying, listen, back in our day, we used to have our father's name connected to us, right? So it'd be Achilles, son of Peleus, Agamemnon, son of Atreus. I'd be Mike, son of David, right? And this fake Homer, right? It's the professor writing as if he's Homer, is saying, hey guys, listen, that's cool that you no longer do that you don't have that burden anymore of being tied to your father. Right? You have now this great freedom in making your own way in the world. And that's great for you. But here's what he says. But that freedom, my sons, is fraught with peril. In my day, we knew who we were. We were tethered, not only to a culture and a family, but to a single man whose accomplishments and character helped determine our own. So he tells the story of Odysseus to Telemachus, right? So Odysseus left Ithaca, Odysseus' son, Telemachus. So Odysseus left Ithaca for 10 years to fight in Troy, and then 10 more years to come back home, right? So here's the professor writing. And yet, though, Telemachus waited 20 years to see his father face to face. He knew well his father's reputation for courage and courtesy, for being skilled in battle and mannerly in speech, strong with his arms and smooth with his words. That was the legacy that Odysseus left to his sons. And although he was not there to instruct him in that legacy, it nevertheless exerted a shaping force on the raw young Telemachus. When tempted to leave the path of virtue, Telemachus called up the image of his father and yearned to follow in his footsteps. Listen, maybe your dad wasn't a man worthy of being followed, but still in a culture that would elevate virtue and virtuous men, there would always be a role model to aspire to be. And we don't have that anymore. Right? Athletes are all kids look up to. Athletes and rappers. Women look towards Cardi B and so just a glorified stripper. So I gotta say, who's the virtuous pop culture figure that exists today? In normal pop culture, who's the virtuous person that we can all point to and be like, we should all be more like that person? I can't think of one. So because it doesn't exist in pop culture, there better be a man and a woman in your kid's life that your kids can point to, because pop culture offers nothing. You have sins of omission, and then you also have pop culture and people and forces working actively against you and against what is good. Wife and I, we love Rocky. We love the Rocky movies. We love Rocky, right? Rocky he's the character. He's sweet and loving. He's a simple man. That's a character, a pop culture figure you could point to in your kids with like virtuous traits: hard work, loyalty, courage, perseverance. Right? Rocky is good. The new Creed movies, have you seen those? They're good, right? First Creed's better than the second, but they're good movies. But we rewatched the first Creed recently, and there's a sex scene in it. First of all, why? Why is there a sex scene? But then oddly, like to make it worse, at the end of the sex scene, the camera pans up. They're having sex in Rocky's house on his couch, Creed and his girlfriend. And the camera pans up and ends on this aquarium of Rocky's 2 pet turtles, Cuff and Link. Little Rocky trivia for you. These are the turtles that Rocky bought from Adrian's pet shop in the first Rocky that he kept going to because he wanted an excuse to spend time with her. So you have this gratuitous, completely unnecessary sex scene, but at the end they do this nod to the beautiful romance that was between Rocky and the love of his life, Adrian. So it's like, you do this gratuitous thing, but you knew you knew that there was something wholesome and beautiful in the first Rocky, right? And you make a nod to it right. And I share that. I saw that. I was like, why do this? Like everything has to be torn down, and everything good has to be defaced and degraded. Everything. That's progressivism. It's not just George W. statues, is what I'm getting at. It's not just George Washington statues. It's not just Thomas Jefferson statues. Everything has to be defaced and degraded, especially things that are pure, especially things that are virtuous, especially things that are noble. The good, the beautiful, and the true, as the real Plato said. The good, the beautiful, and the true, they all have to be defaced. And we wonder why people don't find anything that's good of value anymore. And I'd argue even themselves, right? Hurt people hurt people. That's such like a trite little saying, but I think it's so true. Hurt people hurt people. And I think this hating of America, I think a lot of it's projection. I want to get to Larry Elder. Let's play this real quick. This is one of the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement. Here's.
I also think that it might, I think of a lot of things. The first thing I think is that we actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia in particular are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists. We are super versed on sort of ideological theories. And I think that what we really try to do is build a movement that could be utilized by many, many Black folk.
Okay, so this is a Marxist movement afoot right now, defacing and degrading everything. You gonna let these people win? True story, Mike Slater. Larry Elder up next. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So I know I promoted it like 10 times. We had some confusion, mix-up, scheduling-wise. Larry Elder, we're going to have him later in the week. I promise you that, because he's got this new documentary called Uncle Tom, and you have to watch it. It's fantastic. We'll talk with him coming up soon. Until then, I want to talk about the illusory truth effect, okay? This is why people believe fake news nonstop. This is why people are going on out there believing all the stuff that we're told about police crime and just the whole Black Lives Matter movement in total. Why do people believe this stuff? It's the illusory truth effect. So this was a while back, I want to say maybe a year ago, but there's an article in Verge online website, about people who work at Facebook and Twitter whose job it is to root out the worst content, right? So these people, they spend their day digging through these rabbit holes, getting rid of just like the worst things that are on the internet, right, that are on Facebook and Twitter. And there's this whole group of people that are dedicated to these conspiracy theories. And the thing is, after a while, these people started to believe the conspiracy theories. They started to believe the very things that they were there to try to root out, right? So someone goes into this job and they're like, yeah, I'll get rid of all the 9/11 conspiracy theories. And then after a while, they're like, you know what? 9/11 was an inside job, right? They start like, yeah, Sandy Hook definitely was a CIA hit job, right? Like, how could that be? How do these people get tricked by it? Some of these moderators, they become super paranoid about everything. They fear for their safety. It's just, they go crazy. And it's garbage in, garbage out. That's the illusory truth effect. The simple line is, if you hear something enough times, you'll start to believe it's true. It's the power of repetition. On my radio show, from time to time, we'll talk about how pop music is terrible and why it's terrible. And a while back, we did the science of why pop music is so awful. And also why country music is now so awful, because country music, you only hear a clap track. They don't use drums anymore. They use this horrible clap track or snap track all the time. It's awful. Anyway, think back on the most popular pop songs of the last few years, like the song of the summer, whatever that is. Can't Stop the Feeling by Justin Timberlake. When you first heard the song of the summer, you probably hated it. But then you hear it enough, and then right? And more importantly, once a friend of yours likes it, like some trusted authority in your life says it's good, then you're like, you know what, it is kind of catchy. And then and that's when you've been brainwashed. Same thing advertising, right? See a product on TV, you think it's super stupid, and then you see the commercial enough times, you end up buying it. There's factoids that we pick up along the way of our lives. A factoid is an example of this. I think a factoid is a little fact, a small little fact. No, a factoid is something that's not true. Right? So you pick up these little factoids along the way. So I always thought growing up that when your leg falls asleep, I thought that meant you cut off your blood circulation, right? You cut off circulation to your leg. That's definitely not true. Otherwise, your foot would fall off. Like if your foot falling asleep was cutting off blood circulation, your foot would turn blue and it would fall off. You have to get amputated. It's not cutting off blood circulation. It's not cutting off nerve. You're pinching a nerve or something like that. But I heard it about blood circulation. I never questioned it. There's a factoid that we only use 10% of our brains. It's not true. And again, even the word factoid is something I heard over and over and over again, and it doesn't mean whatever I thought it to mean. So the technical term for this is it's called the fluency and the conference of referential validity, or whatever, it doesn't matter. Point is, there was a study done in the 70s, and they took a group of students, and they asked them 60 true or false questions. Right? But it wasn't only true or false questions, it was then, how confident are you in your answer? All right, so true or false question. So a question would be, the largest museum in the world is the Louvre in Paris. True or false? Right? So I would say true, I think. Like maybe true, sounds right. So I would say true and not that confident. That would be my answer. And there's 60 of those. Right? But then they would ask, they wouldn't just do it once. They would have this person come by 3 times over a 2-week period. And they would ask them different questions, but a couple of them were repeated, all right? So like there'd be 60 different questions, but that Louvre question was in there again. So the second time I take the test, there's all these questions, and then it would come up again. The biggest museum in the world is the Louvre in Paris, true or false? This turns out the second time, people would say, true, I'm pretty confident that the Louvre is the biggest museum in Paris. And then the third time I take the test, is the Louvre is the biggest museum in Paris, true or false? I say, true, I'm certain, 100% it's the biggest museum in the world. So the more they were asked the question, and it was true, false for a reason, right? Because it was worded like a statement. The Louvre is the biggest museum in the world, right? True or false, right? So the more you heard it, the Louvre is the biggest museum in the world, the biggest museum in the world is the Louvre, the biggest museum is the Louvre, the biggest museum. The more you hear it, the more confident you become in it being true. There's another study, we don't have time for this one, but it's also, it's not how often, it is how often, but it's also how it sounds, like literally how the words sound in our brain, like the rhythm of it. This is called processing fluency. So the sentence, birds of a feather flock together. Do you think that's true? Birds of a feather flock together? Turns out most people are like, yeah, that's true, it's definitely true. But then when people were asked, do you think it's true that birds of a feather flock conjointly? People were like, no, I don't think that's right. That doesn't sound right. It's the same thing, it just doesn't flow. So the sentence is, what sobriety conceals, alcohol reveals. People are like, oh, amen to that, brother. But then they're asked, what sobriety conceals, alcohol unmasks. They're like, no, not necessarily, that's not necessarily, right? Just because it doesn't flow, it doesn't rhyme. Right? So to bring it to today, we hear things over and over again. People start to think they're true. Right? 57% of people think that crime's gotten worse since 2008. It hasn't gotten worse. It's gone down a lot. I think I've heard, it depends how you measure it, but I've heard 25% in the last 12 years. Crime's gone down. So why do people think it's gone up? It's because all you hear about in the news all the time, right? You can hear about police brutality, but then when we do talk to Larry Elder, he's great on giving the numbers of how many police are actually killing unarmed black people and how actually police kill way more unarmed white people, but you don't hear about it in the news, right? And then the pleasing sounds, right? Like, so literally rhyming things, but also anything that's pleasing to our currently held beliefs. And that's why the Black Lives Matter slogan is so effective. Who were we talking to the other day who was like it used to be white or black power, right? That used to be the expression. But you're not gonna get suburban housewives to walk around with their kids on the street saying black power, right? But you will get them to, oh, Black Lives Matter. because it appeals to something good inside of us, because it's true. Black lives, of course, matter. But as we just played the clip of, the Black Lives Matter people are trained Marxists, okay? So that's just a pleasing sounding phrase in order to grab your attention and pull you in. Don't fall for that. You're gonna hear certain buzzwords all the time. To go back to the beginning of the show, buzzwords like diversity, that means something very different than what you think it means. Inclusion means something very different than what it actually means. Equity, exact opposite of what you think it means. But your work, your bosses, your HR department is gonna push this stuff on you, and everyone's gonna fall for it because it sounds good. Diversity, equity, it's DIE, it's DIE. So it's diversity, inclusion, and equity. And red flags should go up when it's always, those three are always done in the same order too, right? You're never gonna hear HR, and you're never gonna get an email from HR that says, oh, we're really gonna work on our equity, inclusion, and diversity. It's not. It's always diversity, inclusion, and equity, okay? This is a cult. There's something else going on there when you see it always written, those three, boom, 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 in the exact same order. All right, but you see, it's very pleasing sounding, and it's repeated for you over and over. And you do that long enough, and people start to believe it's true, and people fall for it. But you won't. It's interesting. It's only when you know, how do I word this? When you know how influential these tricks are, like when you have an actual respect for how influential these tricks are, can you begin to not be affected by them? It's a great quote from Henry David Thoreau. Well, my favorite Henry David Thoreau quote is, there's thousands hacking at the branches of evil for every one striking the root. And that's what we try to do in the show. We try to strike the root. We don't hack at the branches of things going on all the time. We try to strike the root of what's going on all the time. But here's another great quote. He said, rather than love, rather than money, rather than fame, give me the truth. And that is harder and harder to come by these days. Coming up next, Professor Vincent Racaniello. We'll get the latest on COVID. I took last week off. I didn't check the news at all. I have no idea what's going on. So we'll get the latest from the professor. Coming up next, True Story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So I was on vacation last week, and I didn't consume any news for an entire week, and I know nothing about what's going on. I came back yesterday, and I just tuned in a little bit, and just like exploding COVID, everything. And I was like, I don't know what's happening. I got to talk to the professor, and super grateful, as always, for Professor Vincent Racaniello. He is the professor of virology at Columbia University, and he's the host of the podcast This Week in Virology. Professor, how are you, sir?
I'm well, thank you very much. How are you?
Good. Everyone the last couple of days has been asking me what the latest on COVID is. And I was like, I don't know. I get all my information from the professor. I try not to read, truly. I try not to read much news about it because, I mean, no offense, but it's written by reporters who don't know this stuff. And you're the expert of experts. So I regret that we haven't talked for a week, but I'm glad you're here. So what have I missed? What's going on?
Well, you missed a big week. So as you know, a couple of weeks ago, we had depressed the rate of new cases here in the U.S., right, by sheltering and face masking and all that. So many states started to open up. It really all began around Memorial Day weekend when everybody went out that weekend. And then slowly after that, other states started to open, some more quickly than others. And so now what we've had is a huge increase in the number of cases diagnosed in the U.S. And, you know, there's some states that are particularly hard hit, California, Texas, Arizona, and Florida are the biggest ones. Other states like New York and the Northeast have remained low. But what it tells us, and it's what I've said all along to you, the virus doesn't go away. It's always around. So if you're not careful, it will come back. And that's exactly what's happened. Now, we haven't yet seen a big spike in the number of deaths. That's really the important part, right? And, you know, deaths always lag a few weeks behind when the outbreak increases, so maybe we'll see that in a few weeks. But here's the thing. The hospitals have really learned how to handle this illness. I speak with a clinician every week on my podcast, and this past week he said, you know, we've really learned how to deal with it so we can keep the mortality rate pretty low. But the key is, of course, not overfilling the hospitals, right? if you have more people than you have beds for, then you have a problem because people will die because they can't be admitted. So that's what we want to try and avoid. So it's good that so far the death rate hasn't increased. But other parts of the world, as you know, many countries it's shooting up, high infection rates, high death rates. So this virus is still ripping its way around the human population for sure. So that's what happened when you were gone.
Yeah, I'd say, geez, that's what I get for leaving. What kind of patients are hospitals better at addressing right now? Is it older or younger people or people who have it really badly or people who just have it a little bit? What do you know about that?
So as we said from the beginning of this outbreak, 80% of these infections are mild, and most of those are in people under 65 years of age. And so when you get 65 and up, you have a higher chance of getting serious disease and ending up in the hospital. And the key for that is most people end up in the hospital when they can't catch their breath. They've had the infection for a while. It's been not a big deal, but all of a sudden they can't breathe. So they go to the hospital, and then it can be downhill from there. They may put you on a ventilator, but we have learned how to take care of them. So first of all, a technique called proning. Instead of lying on the back in the hospital bed, they put you on your belly, and that helps your lungs to function a little better. We have remdesivir, which can help if you're seriously ill. Dexamethasone, a steroid, found to really help this immune storm later in infection. Then, of course, antibodies to the IL-6 receptor. So all these things. Oh, and another one, anti-clotting medicine. So a lot of people develop blood clots, and they have found that treating them with anticoagulants can really help. So those are kind of some of the things we've learned, and it really helps the seriously ill people to survive. That's all we care about. Everyone else, mild illness, doesn't really matter.
Okay, so are you encouraged by those developments?
I am. I think it's good news because really, if everyone were infected with no deaths, we'd all be fine, right? It wouldn't be a big deal.
Yeah.
But the problem is the deaths, and we don't want that to go up and overburden the hospitals. And that happens mainly in big metropolitan areas where there are a lot of people.
Have you been seeing anything now that we've had it for 4 months now, maybe really long enough, but lasting effects of getting the disease?
Yeah, I asked that question. My clinician, by the way, is Dr. Daniel Griffin. He works out on Long Island, and he says really it's too soon. A lot of patients, though, have gone home and they have issues of various sorts. When you're on a ventilator for a couple of weeks, it really wreaks havoc with your body. So too soon to tell if they're going to last a year, 2 years, 3 years, but we'll see. It's really just too early.
When I'm looking at headlines, I see a lot about record-breaking positive cases, right? But I know there's math involved here that most people aren't good at, myself included. What is the test positivity rate? And why does that number matter more than just number of positivities?
Well, there are two things. There's how many tests you run, right? And then what fraction of those are positive. And we're right now still only testing people who are sick for the most part. Certain people who are at risk, if you're in the public and police and healthcare workers, they're being tested. But mostly it's people who go to the hospital and anyone else who can do it. I know, for example, one educational institution where they're testing everybody 3 times a week, which is great. I think everyone needs to be tested really once a week. But we're not testing the general population enough. We're only testing sick people. And the fraction of positives has gone up in the past week, which means there are more infections. That's all that means, right? If we could test everyone every week, it would be great. That's my solution, frankly, and nobody wants to do this. Test everyone once a week. If you're positive, you go home for 2 weeks. Not a big deal. And then we could isolate the virus and stop the spread, but we're not doing that. A few states here and there are doing a fraction of that. Once a week would be tough. It's expensive. These tests are $100 a pop, right? So it would be hard to do.
Is it a political issue or is it a technological issue or a supply issue? Or what do you think?
I think it's all of those things. I think you leave it up to the states. So you say, okay, states, you decide what you want to do. And some governors are saying, localities, you decide what you want to do. And they have to pay for it. It's expensive, yes. So it's all these things combined. But, I think in these 3 months that we shut down, we should have been working on that. ramp up testing, make cheap versions of the tests. The more you test, the cheaper it is. Shouldn't be $100 a pop. It should be a couple of bucks per test, really. Yeah. And we didn't do that. And I don't know all the complicated reasons why, but here we are.
Right now, how are we looking at with the accuracy of these tests? Do you feel confident if someone were to get a test result back that they should believe it?
I've seen many stories of people who seem to have symptoms and they test negative 2 times in a row. So it's not perfect. But what we are seeing now is some new tests rolling out that could be used in conjunction with the PCR test that will help for accuracy. I would say if you had symptoms and you had a negative test, you might need to get it done 3 times before we hit it. Now, that's not 100% of the times. I would say 90% of the times it's pretty good. But, we need to do better at combining different kinds of tests to make sure we get accuracy.
Still not there. How frustrating. Let's get wonky a bit. What do we know about the virus? Have we learned anything new in that realm?
Interestingly, not a lot has come out because most people are working on vaccines and antivirals. And this is a matter of just, getting through phase 1, phase 2 trials in people. But most of the candidates are way behind that. There are only a handful that are in people right now. And that's the problem. So the virus has not changed. It's still the same virus that started out when we began. It's infecting animals. There have been infections of mink in the Netherlands and Denmark. It's infected a handful of cats and dogs here and there, but we don't test them very much, so it could be more than we think.
Is there anything still to learn about the virus itself, or do you think we have a pretty firm handle on that, and now we're just learning how to treat it?
No, I think we can spend years learning more about it because it would prepare us better for the next one. There will be a next one in maybe 10 years or so, and maybe you'll have me back then when that one starts. But we need to be ready for that. And, a lot of people have started to work on the virus, but mostly for, as you say, for vaccines and antivirals. I want to see more fundamental basic stuff, make animal models and understand how the virus causes disease and so forth. And we're not doing enough of that.
So I'm hearing a mixed bag. I'm encouraged by treatments, not as encouraged about vaccine development at the moment. I mean, it's a long road, right?
It is, yeah.
But is that a fair assessment of where you're at right now? A little bit of a mixed bag there?
Yeah, I think vaccine development is still really, we're lucky if we're talking about next spring, next summer, which is what I've always said to you, right? A lot of people say, Tony Fauci said maybe by the end of the year. I'd be really surprised. But even then, let's say a vaccine comes out next spring. Who's going to get it? Not you and me. Yeah. Policemen, firemen, public-facing people, healthcare workers, they're going to get it all first because you can't make 7 billion doses all at once. No. And most of them are going to be injected. So we need 7 billion syringes to inject everybody in the world. Can you imagine? That is a logistical issue that we really haven't thought about yet. So, and since, let's say, 5 vaccines are now in the works, if you could make 100 million doses of each, because that's a lot, that's not enough for the world, right? So we have some ways to go.
Yeah. So let me ask this selfishly, Professor. I know I always ask you about my mom. Because the question is like, what do we do? What does each individual person do? But there's so many different variables at play that it's hard to ask that question. Mm-hmm. So I think what most people are concerned about are people over, let's say, 70 years old and traveling and going places.
Right.
What level of awareness / staying at home would you recommend for someone over the age of 70?
I always tell people, if you can, stay home as much as you can. All right. Now, you have to go out at some point. Make sure you wear a face mask, please. I see a lot of people not wearing them. It's not right. You may be young, but at some point you're going to contact an older person, and it's not fair for you to make them sick, and especially not for them to die because you were careless. So older people, stay at home as much as you can. If you need to go somewhere, please wear a face mask and make sure you wash your hands. And if you need to travel, look at the outbreak numbers in the states that you're going to and make sure that it's low. Right now, those states I mentioned at the top, they're pretty dangerous to travel to. And a lot of the northeastern states won't let you come back from those states without quarantining 2 weeks in place. So you have to look at where you want to go and so forth. Personally, I'm not going anywhere for the rest of this year probably. And I usually do a lot of traveling for business. Not going to do it. I'm 67. Right? I'm kind of on the border of that risk group.
Okay. All right. I feel updated, Professor. Updated and mixed, but I'll take that because things could be even worse, I suppose. Professor Vincent Rackaniel, how do people find your podcast, sir?
You could go to microbe.tv, or you can find it on any podcast player on your phone or tablet. Just search for This Week in Virology. And we
I love that
do
website.
it twice a week.
Microbe.tv. That's a great website. That's perfect. All right. This Week in Virology, Professor Vincent Rackaniel. Professor, it's an honor. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
True story. Mike Slater. We'll do it again tomorrow. Spread the word.